welcome you here today to PHN Presents Craft Street Senior Housing, a new pace setter, we're calling it, because I think it truly is, as we'll see. And I'm really pleased to be joined by John Martin and Maureen Sanchez, who helping drive this project, both architecturally, design, integration of everything Passive House. Before we get started with the presentation, though, I'd like to just briefly introduce the Passive House Network to those of you who may not know us or know us well. We are a national nonprofit. We're affiliated with the Passive House Institute and the International Passive House Association. We have national membership and regional chapters because it's really about the peer-to-peer knowledge sharing and community building with events like this, with our annual conference, and our trainings. And it really involves a focus on continual education, because we know that Passive House training really changes our vocabulary, changes our conversations, our expectations. It changes building culture. And this is really what's required to make buildings effective in the age of our climate crisis. I do, in that context, want to mention just a couple of upcoming events and trainings. This Thursday, actually, I'm excited to be presenting on the PHI path to multifamily building certification. So I have a feeling we may be touching into some of those subjects here today, but certainly a deep dive into the ins and outs of building certification. And it is in the context of Massachusetts, but wherever you are across the US, Canada, or otherwise, I think it will have value. So if you can make it, I look forward to seeing you on Thursday. We have upcoming as well trainings around the Certified Passive House Designer course and the Tradesperson course. The designer course we have coming up in New England, as well as other locations in California, South, the Midwest. We're excited to start doing training, hybrid training, online, on demand, live, and some in person. And the Tradesperson course, which is very valuable. We have upcoming trainings through EMU, EMU Passive in Minnesota and Montana coming up. So if you can make it there, highly encourage it. And then finally, a quick note, an open invitation to everyone. We were just talking before we came on here. The conference, the international conference, is coming up in Wiesbaden, Germany in March. And it is one of those truly great experiences. If you can make it, you won't regret it. You meet so many incredible people from around the world doing amazing things. And the building tours are not to be forgotten, both in terms of the incredible projects and construction that you see, but also the people on the tours that you get to know. So encourage everyone to take advantage of that. A quick shout out to our sponsors, who we could not do much of our programming without. We are very fortunate to have sponsors that care as much about high quality components and services as we do, because really that striving for high quality is what is going to set Passive House apart. With that, I'm very happy to come back to our presentation here today on Craft Street Senior Housing, a new pace setter, because it really is the new breed of building, right? Multifamily, supportive housing, high density, interesting uses, including a commercial kitchen, electrification, and Passive House, particularly in the context of Massachusetts, where this is becoming building code in certain municipalities that are taking on the opt-in stretch code. If you're not from Massachusetts, you may not be aware of this, but in the coming months, the Passive House certification is becoming part of the building code for buildings like this in towns like Newton, where this project is located. So demystifying this, hearing the stories are so important in moving the industry forward more widely. And with that, I think we have two great people here today. Could not be happier to introduce John Martin and Maureen Sanchez, and both who have had the pleasure of presenting at different PHN events before in the past. I'm going to just read here briefly from this so I don't mess it up too badly. So John Martin, of course, is a principal at Elkus Manfredi Architects. His experience ranges from overseeing master plans for entire campuses and mixed-use developments to leading the design of research buildings that support interdisciplinary discovery to the revitalization of urban communities. He received his bachelor's degree in both environmental design in architecture and civil engineering from North Carolina State University and a master's of architecture from Harvard University Graduate School of Design. John serves on the Urban Land Institute Housing and Economic Council and is also currently working on the Commons Residence Hall at the University of Southern Maine, which is also seeking Passive House certification as well. And we had the pleasure of learning about that project last year at our conference in Boston. Maureen Sanchez, Associate Passive House Specialist, Service Lead at RDH Building Science. Being part of Canada's highly experienced Passive House professional circle, Maureen leads RDH Building Science's Passive House Consulting Services. She focuses on the design of large-scale institutional and mixed-use projects, channeling her passion to address the climate emergency. In addition to her consulting work, Maureen also supports various levels of government in implementing policies, including advising on the City of Toronto's Climate Advisory Group and sitting on Passive House Canada's Board of Directors. Maureen, I should also note, is also an accredited Passive House building certifier. So with that, I would like to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Maureen and John.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. First, on behalf of both Maureen and I would like to thank Ken and the Passive House Network for allowing us to make this presentation to you. We're excited about this particular project, and we do think that, as Ken has already alluded to, it is fast becoming the kind of prototype or the paradigm for multifamily and, in this case, senior housing construction. If you go to the next slide, Maureen, today we're just going to take you through 6 different aspects of this project that we feel would be enlightening for you. A description of the project, a little bit about how regulations are changing, the baseline is shifting, a little bit about the enclosure itself, and then a piece about the systems we use, and then conclude by looking at the cost and the numbers and the preliminary modeling. We're only at schematic design stage in the project, so everything is still very fluid, and you'll see how that plays out over the course of the presentation. The project itself is 185 apartments for seniors in the relatively affluent suburb of Newton, outside of Boston, Massachusetts. Newton has, over the past 3 years, looked at how they can add density to what is largely a single-family town, and they've identified 2 commercial corridors that could really be enhanced by additional density, largely for multifamily housing around transit centers. This project fits in with that overall master plan. As you can see from the aerial, it's 1 block removed from a major street, which flanks a railway, that railway is the commuter rail, and that flanks the Massachusetts Turnpike. So as this suburban location goes, this is a pretty urban location, and introducing the additional density here makes sense. But specifically, this was targeted and designed to let elderly people from Newton and the surrounding communities kind of age in place, not have to leave their town to find later in life options, both for independent living and assisted living and even memory care. And the emphasis from the very outset, from the programming of the building to the food that's served in the dining rooms, to the way the building is constructed is to really place an emphasis on doing a sustainable, a safe, and healthy project to extend the lives and the quality of life for the people who live here and give them the best possible outcome. And as the bullet point notes, to free up housing, single-family homes in Newton and the surrounding communities for younger generations with families. So in that sense, Passive House worked right in. Specifically, the program is a 6-story building. It's 2 wings, as you saw. The hockey-shaped wing, that I said that for your benefit, Maureen. The hockey stick-shaped wing is the independent living, and the bottom left wing is assisted living and memory care. There is a single level of underground parking that takes up pretty much the entire footprint of the site, and altogether it's about 224,000 square feet. Particular to our audience today, in addition to the actual living units themselves, these common spaces that you're seeing on the first floor this is an all-electric building, which would include this commercial kitchen, which serves 2 dining rooms, an independent living dining room and an assisted living dining room. And we'll particularly focus on what you see in blue there, which is the fitness program for the project, which includes not only a fitness room and the things you would expect to see, but an indoor pool, which obviously has to be heated and maintained year-round. So on to the next, Maureen. This is the upper floor plans. You see where the 2 wings, they're joined on the first floor, but they separate themselves on the second floor. Again, the upper right is all of the independent living apartments, ranging from small 1-bedrooms to even a couple of large 3-bedrooms. And then the wing down to the left is the smaller assisted living units and memory care units on the second floor. Altogether, 185 residences around this central court. Good.
Great. Thanks, John, for that introduction. Yes, so before diving into the project detail, as Ken mentioned, we're going to touch on quickly as to what the regulation landscape is in Massachusetts for anybody not quite familiar with it. So in Massachusetts, the energy code is changing really fast. And actually, as of January 1st of this year, this energy code has been updated. You have a base one, which is very barely used. As you can see, the stretch code is where most municipalities are sitting in with. And then with that code update, you now have the specialized opt-in stretch code. What does that mean? It means that you have 2 different paths of compliance depending on the path the municipality is choosing for you. As you can see, the vast majority of municipalities are still with the stretch code, which the first thing to flag is that we are moving to absolute metrics. You can see that they are setting for us thermal energy demand intensities, that what we call the TEDI, that space heating demand that we keep talking about. And also that they are significantly tightening because some of these targets are actually tighter than Passive House. And we already know Passive House is already quite stringent as a starting point. This is to the left. To the right, if certain municipalities opt voluntarily into the new specialized opt-in stretch code, they are now moving down the path towards Passive House certification, starting this January for the smaller projects all the way to January 2024 for larger projects. And just to give you a little flavor, but we've heard as of last week that we've already got several municipalities that have chosen to follow that specialized opt-in stretch code, such as Cambridge, Brookline, Somerville, and Watertown. So quite a lot of leadership this way. What does that specialized opt-in stretch code mean? Again, just to give you a little visual before zooming back onto the project. What you're seeing on the screen is to the left, the residential portion, to the blue, the commercial portion. And what you're seeing is that as soon as you're with multifamily residential left side of the screen, passive house will be a compliance path no matter what characteristics your building has, right? So if you look at, if you are not taller than 5 stories, which is not the case for us, you still have 2 different paths, but passive house is still there. If you have a building taller than 5 stories, you can see that passive house will start becoming a requirement as soon as January this year, all the way to January 2024. So really fast changing regulations that are changing the way we will design buildings. So this is for Massachusetts altogether, and that particular slide on the specialized opt-in stretch code. And one more thing for the town of Newton, this is where this project is based, where at the moment, every single commercial new build has to be all electric. That is because of their sustainability ordinance, but that requirement might be extended to all of the new construction as well as major renovations once that electrification home rule passes. Newton is pushing to be part of the 10 municipalities that are undergoing that pilot project, so you can see the path in which we're going. It's getting extremely clear, and it's moving extremely fast. So going back to the baseline for a second and looking at our exact project. With these, changing and tightening requirements, our baseline is not the one we're used to having. So we're going to look at that over the next section. What we were used to having was that type of multifamily residential projects, onto which the domestic hot water is typically based on gas, right? And that is a typology that we will be working with on this project, but we are adding additional challenging typologies, and that's going to skew a little bit our project performance. So what am I talking about? Yes, we still have the residential portion, but we are adding 3 additional components, and you're going to see that the color coding that we have for the presentation is maintained, so to help you visually with the different zones that we're working with. We have that level 1 non-residential podium, we do have the kitchen, and we have the pool. So we are working with high energy consumers in these 2 typologies, which are increasing the EUI, the energy use intensity, which is the total amount of energy consumption the building is using. So we're adding these different and more challenging typologies, while also shifting the domestic hot water from gas to electricity based. So this is changing quite a lot of things. So for us to understand better, like you can see on the graph, we've highlighted the key levers for each typology, but for us to be able to make decisions before schematic design, right? Because I'm sharing with you some of the work that has been done at concept during the concept phase. We've decided to use a technical comparison table as our tool for decision making, to understand if we were going to follow these targets, and if so, what it meant. So this is the quick overview of the 3 typologies in terms of, to the left, what the new, sorry, I've lost my mouse, bear with me. Here we go. To the left, what the all electric baseline now means, and to the right, what does it mean to increase our performance all the way to passive house standard. And what you can see is, yes, there are a few differences. You don't have to read through everything. We've highlighted them for you. The first thing I want to highlight is in orange, this is what, funnily enough, we realized there wasn't such a big difference in specification. So if I go down to heating and cooling, you can see that the system stays identical. We might even work with a smaller system, so potentially slightly cheaper. And in terms of what is required on particularly your external walls, we have a lot of those. Yes, we do have a little bit of additional insulation, but as the code requires a continuous layer of insulation, we're not fundamentally changing our approach. So this is a positive note to see that these upgrades were not significant in the grand scheme of things. However, the significant ones are highlighted in red, and clearly we're looking at refined window to wall ratio, improved window frame and glazing performance. John will touch on that a little bit later, and a big shift on the domestic hot water side, which is a change in design strategy, shifting from an electric resistance, so direct electric for domestic hot water, to an air source heat pump approach. We've done a similar approach for the kitchen to again understand what we were facing. And yes, there are a few changes. Worth noting that the kitchen equipment is normally a big change from what we're used to doing, but now that we have an all-electric baseline, you can see that there's no significant changes in equipment anymore from our baseline to the passive house case. However, yes, we do have a few key items, mainly looking at heat recovery into the ventilation portion of the kitchen, as well as that domestic hot water production. You're starting to see the theme there. Finally, for the pool, same thing again. We've looked at that difference between what we consider an all-electric baseline to what passive house would ask us to do. And again, the key design decisions that we had to make really early are mainly around the ventilation approach, which is again a little bit more delicate with the passive house approach, similar to the kitchen, as well as the domestic hot water. So again, you can see that common theme shared across all the zones. So this was more or less a high-level summary that we had to do before even getting any energy models, let alone detailed drawings to guide the client into their decision making, right? What are the targets that we're aiming to have and trying to maintain for the project? And what does that mean for our design? And what does that mean for our cost? With that in mind, and with these tools at their disposal, they were able to do a little bit more work, which we'll share in the last section around the business case. But the next two sections, John and I will go through the next step of the design regarding the schematic design and the progress that we've done, and the integrated approach that we have had to use to really deliver that high level of performance on that project. So John, back to you with the enclosure.
Yeah, thank you, Maureen. And I'm seeing questions come in the chat. I know we'll have opportunity later, but one caught my eye, and that was, who was the developer? We're working with Mark Development here in Newton, and what was their motivation for doing this? They do clearly see it as they want to be market leaders. And so they do clearly see this offering a passive house certified project as a marketing kind of strategy. But I think what really drove them was just a social consciousness. The same thing that drives most of us is to try to be good stewards of the environment. So I wanted to put that in there for them, as well as a very enlightened developer that we're working with here. So in terms of the enclosure, we'll show you a quick graph that you all know very well, which is the opportunity to influence this design is the greatest at the very beginning. And usually in our profession of architecture and engineering, the performance review has come sometime in design development or even construction documents. By really committing to passive house from the start of this, we're able to now shift all of these reviews and make these decisions much earlier in the design cycle. So if you go to the next slide, I think this little square moves over to the left. And so right now, we're going to talk about cost in a moment, but we just got our schematic design price estimate in, and we have been able to develop a lot more specific case scenarios for the building enclosure than a cost estimator would usually see at this very early stage, which is going to help us at the end to really make the most of our building envelope. So let's go forward, Maureen. In terms of the building enclosure itself, the first step is just to determine the boundary. And clearly this would have been a much easier lift had we just said we're going to concentrate on floors 2 through 6 and only the residential. But here, because largely with Green Newton, the organization in Newton that advocates for highly sustainable design, and the developer's commitment, we are doing the whole building, and that made it a lot more complex. We've worked hard to eliminate thermal bridging in the structure, and we've worked hard to eliminate thermal bridging in the fenestration. Maureen already alluded to the window wall ratio. I'll say a little bit more about that later. And then to just develop clear field effective R values for use in the energy models. If you go to the next, specifically, we define the thermal enclosure to exclude the garage beneath. The bottom right image there is the garage. It is unheated, so it's not a part of our thermal envelope. But as you can see from the diagrams, pretty much everything else is included. And go to the next. We did not let passive house considerations drive the form, materials of the design. We approach this design much as we would any other project, letting the program and the functional relationships and the quality of the spaces inside determine the massing of the building. And it created some interesting things. This is our pedestrian entry from the street the main street that the independent living building fronts, the front porch there, opening to the lobby. And then as you saw in the plan, right off of the lobby is that fitness area with this pool. So it projects out underneath the body of the building, and it creates a very interesting condition for us. If we slice a section right through that pool, you would get something that looks like this. To the bottom right, my cursor doesn't work, so I'm going to rely on you, Maureen. To the bottom right is the unheated garage. Bottom underneath the pool is terra firma, and you can see up above the green shaded area are the independent living units. So we literally have half of the pool underneath the building adjacent to the public spaces, which are heated. We have residential units half above, and we have the pool itself that extends half out into the atmosphere and half under the building. So we really created an interesting situation for us. And as you can see, the strategy here is to isolate that pool and create a thermally secure envelope for that pool itself with continuous perimeter insulation. If you go to the next.
John, I'm just going to add a little bit on that one. You can see that both the orange and red lines define our thermal enclosure, which John just talked about, but I just want to take a second to highlight that the red line, which is around the pool, this is also needed for from a thermal standpoint, as well as controlling relative humidity levels. It's important to note that even if the pool is within the thermal enclosure, we have a different temperature set points, much higher than the rest of the building. So we're going to have heat losses to the rest of the building, as well as higher RH. So it almost requires like its own zone subdivision, hence that red line on the drawing.
Correct. So as we go further up in the building, this is a pretty abstract drawing with 3 different thermal conditions on the left, but I want to call your attention to the right. One of the things that we always struggle with in multifamily housing, even when it's not passive house, is the thermal bridging created by the balconies for residential units. And you see both conditions here. Floors 1 and 2 are steel frame. And so we have balconies on level 2, which attach to the steel frame and are framed in steel. And then up above 3, 4, 5, and 6, we have a wood frame. We switch from to a wood structural system. So we have wood trusses, and of course the balconies are framed in wood. And we actually reoriented the structure to make it longitudinal rather than perpendicular to the wall, so we have fewer penetrations through that thermal barrier, and that's so far working well for us in our WUFI models. If you go to the next, yes, go
Sorry,
ahead.
John. Final thing, I was just going to say, just quick shout out at the delightful drawings from Elkus Manfredi here. I don't know if you can see, but all the orange to the left, all the orange are heated space, be it at level 1 or the parkade, and the gray is the parking garage. And you can see, like, I know we have, it's quite small, we haven't highlighted it, but you see continuous layer of insulation wrapping underneath the footing to go back up. So just, you know, music to my ears. So I just wanted to point it out because we don't always get it. So
Maureen says it's music to her ears. Actually, she made us do it. So
true. But you're not supposed to say that, John.
It really has been a collaborative partnership, and it's been a great back and forth between our two firms. Just a quick word about fenestration. When Maureen starts talking about reducing the window wall ratio, that's profanity to us. We want, especially as small as these, I'm showing you the entry to the assisted living and the memory care on second floor, assisted living on third, which are typically very small units, almost like student housing type units. And it's our belief that the smaller the unit, the bigger the window needs to be, to just let in daylight, to create views. And so we have worked hard to minimize the divisions of the glass to you know, the mullion is the point that creates the thermal break. We're using, as Maureen talked about, triple glazed windows. We're specifying at this initial stage an Intus fiberglass type product in there. And so we're really working hard with the technical specifications of the window so we can keep that window wall ratio as big as possible to let in the most light and make these great apartments. But it is something we're focused on. And with that, I'll hand it back to Maureen to talk a little bit about, oh, I got one more slide. I skipped it, sorry. The purpose of this slide is, if you look at the right, again, the right column, every single one of these colors represents a different wall assembly. And as we go from the garage up through the steel frame, and because of our heights, actually part of the third floor is actually framed in concrete and steel, because wood can only go a number of feet vertically. So we don't start our wood framing until the middle of the third floor. And then at the top, we have like a 1 foot offset or setback. So trying to get to this R30 actual R rating for this wall requires several different assemblies as we go up. And we've been tracking each of those, again, doing this WUFI modeling as we go to make sure that it's not just R30 on paper, but it's actually R30 considering all of the thermal penetrations as well. So now,
yeah, that's a really good point, John. Like, we had agreed during concept design to overall performance target without detailing the assemblies. But as soon as we started for schematic design to detail these assemblies, we went and already got a look at any cladding attachments and insulation fasteners that would derate the insulation, just to make sure we were maintaining that performance from the outset. Hence all the colorful drawings and notes shared everywhere. Okay, so thank you, John, for that. That was that overview on building enclosure, which really had, I think, I was going to say most. It had definitely a fair part of that collaboration during schematic design. However, the HVAC side was also fairly demanding. So what are we currently working with? As a quick overview of the current HVAC design, the ventilation, served by centralized certified ERVs serving per zone. So they're distributing vertically and trying to be divided between the different zones to have a little bit more flexibility on there. And with the residential portion, because it's mainly residential, and we have fairly set occupancy. We're working with constant flow rate. However, on the level 1 non-residential portion, we are definitely working with variable flow rates to work more within, demand control ventilation rather than ventilating to the maximum all the time. So this is very common with passive house designs. Heating and cooling, again, nothing too unusual. We're working with an air source heat pump VRF system, which is, working vertically and distributed per zone for added flexibility, roof mounted. So yeah, nothing unusual. And for the domestic hot water, we are working with a central system to be able to do, as much heat recovery as we can, and as much, finding the efficiencies for everything except for the pool, which is a little bit particular. And of course, we're working with, good levels of insulation both on the storage tanks as well as the distribution system. So this is something that should be familiar to people working with high performance buildings. But I wanted to touch base on two key levers that we have with the HVAC, which we're already melting our brains on to trying to optimize straight from the outset. So the two things, I'm going to start with the graph on the right. This is not the graph for the project. We don't have it yet. We're just finalizing it, but it shows the energy, the space heating balance. You have all the losses to the left and all the gains to the right. With the free gains, solar gains and internal heat gains, and the red block is what you're paying. It's your space heating demand to maintain, to keep the losses and the gains equal, so your building maintains its temperature. So this is that space heating demand that we're trying to keep under 4.75 kilobDUs per square feet per year in that project. And what I want to flag is, in a typical residential project, the ventilation block is already using a lot of that heat loss on the graph, right? That's the entire green block. But with the project that we are, with this project and with what we're facing, that green block keeps getting bigger and bigger. Why is that? First of all, Massachusetts is moving towards the International Mechanical Code 2021, starting this July. And knowing that we're going to go for building permit after that, we have to already design with these higher ventilation flow rates. So by definition, we've just said that when before we needed only this much ventilation per room, today we need a little bit more for following this code. Likely, some impact of COVID and higher ventilation rates in there. But that gets, combined with yet higher flow rate requirement for the memory care. So John mentioned that we have independent living, assisted living, but we also have one floor of one wing being memory care. And the ventilation requirements that we have in these particular rooms are a lot closer to what you would see in a hospital setting than what you would see into a residential approach. So what I'm showing is that the graph we're used to using on the left, or used to seeing, will probably grow disproportionate with the ventilation piece eating more and more of that pie, which means that we're going to need to push further and do better on the enclosure, which means all your opaque assemblies, glazed assemblies, as well as thermal bridging, right? Because we have a lot less flexibility on the solar gains and the internal heat gains based on the design and the occupancy being set to maintain that red block within the allowance we get given. So that will be a fun one. We're working through the modeling exercise as we speak. The second one, you've already understood what we're going to talk about. It's that domestic hot water and how are we creating it. So the graph in front of you are the three options that we used to have. That fossil fuel option, where with your baseline, which uses a lot of energy, but the price is somewhat cheap. We now have a new baseline where we have to move all electric. So if we don't improve the building performance, you can see that the EUI, which is actually not quite the EUI, but just the total energy consumption is unchanged. We're not changing the performance, we're just changing the energy source for the domestic hot water. And you can see the increase in, price per kilowatt on the screen. Or third option, you staying all electric, but you are significantly improving your building through and your domestic hot water production through the use of air source heat pumps, where yes, the price per kilowatt is the same, but because you are benefiting of a COP between 2 and 3 on that air source heat pump domestic hot water, you are having a much lower total energy consumption. And the truth is that this is what we're facing. So option one is now taken away from us because of that all electric requirement, and that's the way regulations are moving throughout the country. The new baseline has extremely high operational cost because of that switch to all electric. By the way, the pricing that you're seeing on the screen, they're trying to be all inclusive pricing, not just the exact price per kilowatt, but also including flat rate for delivery and other things. But these are, I believe, all the prices from the fall of 2022. And what we're seeing currently is that these pricing are already going up, which means that all the operational costs you're going to see and savings are probably on the conservative side. And on the other side, you have a much cheaper process to operate, but you have, of course, cost premium to go with the SOC pump approach, but also you need more comfort on the design and, the maintenance, like what you're going in with, knowing this is a type of system that has been used in some passive house, but is not the norm everywhere. So with that, John, I'm going to pass it back to you to bring us home with that business case.
Yes, and there is a business case for this. And so moving forward to the next slide, Maureen. Basically, you can see we've broken it out by component here, but not inconsistent with probably some literature that you guys have all seen for mid-rise multifamily housing. We're seeing a premium of about 5.9% of first cost. And, a better building costs more money, but it is a much better building. It ends up being about a $5 million premium on what was projected to be a $92 million project. As I mentioned, we've just gotten in our construction, our initial estimate at schematic design. Suffice it to say, in these inflationary times, it's a little bit over that target of 92 million. And so we are value engineering the building. We're trying to find ways we can save money, but we've never, the owner, the developer has never questioned the commitment to passive house. So if you go to the next slide.
Sorry, John, just before you do that, I thought it was worth, I find it interesting to split it out as well in terms of the cost. The 5-6% is something you've seen, but if you look at the residential only, we're looking at 3%. You're looking at about 1% for the challenging typologies. They do ask for more, but they're smaller floor areas and smaller price impact, and then the 2% on the heat pump approach. So it was very interesting to split that a little bit more to see that if you're working with a kind of typical residential, you don't have to see the 5-6% increase, right?
Right, that's correct. Fortunately, there are incentives, and we had 2 paths in Massachusetts. There's a mass save passive house multifamily incentive, or an incentive directly from the energy provider Eversource. Yep. And so we chose the second path because it yields more of an incentive. Anything you wanted to say about this, Maureen?
No, we've broken it by all the breakdown of how all these fees or all these incentives break together. But what I want to highlight is that the mass save incentive approach is incredibly generous compared to what I've seen. So again, just please use it, okay? Because this is good buildings, but what you can see through that is almost a $1 million approach to deliver a better building is covering more than half of that air source heat pump approach for domestic hot water, which was the big unknown on that project, right? The rest of the cost increase, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but the developer said it was a given no matter what to deliver a bigger building. So the main cost premium, which has more uncertainties around that heat pump, which was around 1.7 million, and that $960,000 goes a long way to helping us move that way.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then a couple of graphs on operational energy and operational costs, because that is part of of the business case. What you're seeing in front of you are, for each color, the amount of energy we're using, and in hatched gray, the savings that we're getting. And what is worth pointing out is on the right, you're seeing the floor distribution. So you can see the residential dominates the amount of floor area we have by more than 80%. However, even if the kitchen and the pool are technically small in terms of square meter, they're skewing the results because they are high, energy use areas, okay? And because we're all electric, you can see that the graph has an identical look when we translate that to dollars. And again, you can see the cost on color and the savings at the top combined together in the total gray bar. What I want to flag on that is, yes, the owner-operator model is quite helpful because all the savings are, none of them are going back to the tenant, right? The owner operator is capturing everything, which helps. And also, I mentioned that before, these calculations are dating from this summer before we started to see cost increases. So we think that this is already quite on the conservative side, knowing that, utility cost keeps climbing up.
So the business case comes out that without any incentive, it's a 13-year return on investment. With the incentives, it comes down to 10 years. That assumes a static energy price, which I'm not sure anybody on this call believes is going to happen. And it also excludes any future risk for greenhouse gas emission penalties, as Boston and a lot of other large cities and even Newton are considering going to with an energy reporting disclosure ordinance. So you do kind of future-proof it by doing this. And on to the next, Maureen. That future-proofing is just part of kind of the hard to make tangible or intangible added value. We protect against the rising energy costs. We create passive survivability in the case of tornadoes, hurricanes, floods. All of those things are very important in a senior housing facility. We provide resiliency against climate change. Our indoor temperatures stay at a much more constant state, regardless of the weather outside. We improve the indoor air quality by the filtration, mechanical ventilation, and overall comfort of the building by controlling more closely the humidity as well as the temperature. So for our developer, it's a very strong business case. They plan to own and operate this for many years, longer than 10 years. So for them, despite an initial cost premium that's, hard to swallow, but the benefits and the added value far outweigh it. So Maureen, any last comments?
Let's go through the key takeaways. So, okay, looking ahead, we have to become very comfortable with what's going to happen. And what we're seeing are tighter targets, need for electrification, as well as rising costs. So with all of that in mind, that changes the baseline we're used to using. So that's something to be very aware of. Second takeaway, in terms of new typologies, if we are to deliver high performance buildings, there is a clear need to understand the unique additional end use that we have. So that goes for the commercial kitchen, that goes for the pool, really understanding the key levers so that we can design according to that, right? Leaving that for later is not the right recipe. And finally, I'm sure most of you on the call know it, but just reiterating that you do need that early stage integrated design. Like without this, you won't have, cost and or performance optimization. And for us to have that early stage integrated design, this has allowed us to push key decisions much earlier than what we would normally do to help a client through that decision-making process and aiming for such high building performance targets. And it's also helping us optimize the whole design by really taking a holistic approach. There's no design in silo between enclosure, mechanical, structural. It's all together at the design table, which has already led to a fair amount of optimization. So it's the way we want to see things moving. And with that, Ken, we're going to pass it back to you and the questions.
Great, thank you so much. This is such a terrific project and great to get these peaks in while you're working through it and seeing it developing. It's too long a time to wait until the building's completely done. We need to share this knowledge and learn from everybody as we go. So there are a number of great questions. I'll feed them in here a little bit as we talk in the next few minutes. I did want to start with a general question though, John, for you as an architect working on big projects, similar projects in the past, moving into the passive house space. This is not your first rodeo. Although the residence at the University of Southern Maine isn't complete yet, I'm just curious your experience there, here, and thinking as an architect working on these bigger commercial projects, the whole issues of integration, early integration, working with the consultants, what the passive house consultants are bringing to that integration. And I don't know, just how are the wheels turning? Is it something that's invigorating your practice, or
Sure.
do you feel like?
Yeah, no, it's definitely invigorating us. Several of my team members are on this call today, and they've put their heart and soul into this project, as well as the University of Southern Maine project that you've alluded to. And I do think it really energizes all of us. These are the kind of buildings that we want to design, and we're not engineers. And typically when it comes to housing, the engineering systems, the HVAC systems are always pushed towards lowest first cost, regardless of energy use. That was the typical model. And so to be able to use the energy use and the efficiency of the system as the primary driver and not the first cost has been really exhilarating for us, and helping our clients or developers understand that looking of the first cost, unless you intend to flip the building, is not really the most prudent way to go about the design. Our engineering partners and passive house consultant partners have been invaluable because they bring the specific knowledge of new innovations in mechanical equipment to push those efficiencies higher, things that aren't necessarily mass market yet, but that really increase performance. They know about those things before we do. So it's been really great having this kind of partnership with Marine on this project.
Great. I think looking at some of the systems and some of the details and whatnot to dive in here a little bit, and the question of certified components or not certified components. I think you had mentioned going towards certification of the ERVs, perhaps, on this project. And just curious, I guess, well, given the volume of ventilation, but if you could speak a little bit more to that. And I was also thinking where the ventilation is really pushing the envelope, so to speak, in terms of energy use, as we're going to bigger windows and talking about the window specification, is it something that's coming out of certified components, or is it modified? And what might that mean?
Sorry, can you mean for the windows as well? Certified.
Yeah, for the windows, yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'll start with the windows. We are using a certified components like Massachusetts is, or you know, the states. Definitely things are changing, and we have more distributors and more suppliers. So that's been great. And it doesn't mean that we will, you know, that we are going to sole source, even if we're starting with one certain product. However, it gives us the confidence of the performance we're going with to start with, right? In terms of
Right.
managing your energy budget, it gives us straight, clear performance targets that we can then value engineer against once we get to that phase, okay? But we're still clearly, you know, being towards the end of schematic design, we haven't approached 3, 4, 5 suppliers yet. So we're going to need to do that. The other portion around the certified ERVs, again, to avoid, you know, additional penalties in the model for products that haven't been tested as per the Passive House methodology. We are using the certified ones, but I believe it's okay for now. We're using centralized ERVs, and even if, you know, we know the bigger players, we are still not sole sourcing, right? We do have 2 to 3 central ERV suppliers that we can work with. And again, we're using a certified component to clearly set the performance target that we're aiming at in the specification, that we're costing, and that we are using in the model. And then as schematic design and design development goes through, we will keep trying to, you know, do value engineering and look at all the options to maintain that performance while, you know, while shopping around, right?
Right. Yeah, and that's all. So I guess there's a bunch here that I want to speak to, but I would say I'm going to touch it on the 23rd, on Thursday, when I talk about the certification process. Speaking about the domestic hot water and the kind of heat recovery in general, the ventilation, but also in the hot water and the hot water systems. Did you is there any attempt to do heat recovery from the hot water systems? And did you also think about ground source heat pumps as well to couple with the air source?
Yeah, good questions. So ground source, we haven't looked at it just because of capital cost, right? It's not, it's probably going to be more expensive than the air source heat pump, and we're already trying to manage cost, and that's a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
So we haven't, you know, we haven't been talking about geo exchange on that one. And of course, yes, for heat recovery, we are going to do it. Okay, it's we're still at a higher level schematic design. So
Right.
The only thing I have to go with is a mechanical narrative. So that doesn't give you enough to share nice schematics and showing, but definitely we are paying really close attention as to where the waste heat is, when is it available, and is there any synergy with the domestic hot water demand. I believe at the moment we will work through passive domestic hot water heat recovery approaches, partnered with the air source heat pump, creating the vast majority of the new domestic hot water that we need, rather than an active wastewater heat pump approach like we've used on the University of Toronto project, for instance. But bear with me, I need another 6 months of design before starting to share.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderfully, I can say this, it's a wonderfully complicated project here, right? And so how you work through the pieces,
yes,
and bring it together. And to that end, not to add complication, but that same conversation, because you've got an indoor swimming pool with heat pumps, I don't know, just the thought process or not around like that thermal energy.
Sorry, say that again, Ken.
So the swimming pool, as you're using air source heat pumps to give the hot water for the swimming pool as well.
Correct.
Right. And throwing off, I guess, with the air conditioning, the air conditioning season, or is there some way to use the extraordinary energy used in the pool to offset energy elsewhere? Does that make sense?
Yes, I think I think I'm seeing where you're going.
I'm
Let me
sorry, I'm
bring
not more
it back.
articulate.
No, it's a very complicated subject, but um, the truth is that your pool will be at a higher temperature. So already you will have a bit of heat leaking back to the main building, which will be useful. Okay, that is accounted in the energy model with the heat loss between the two spaces. But also, once if you zoom in on the pool, once you heat the pool water, that takes care of most of your heating demand, right? You don't have to heat the air in addition to that.
Right.
So what we're doing is making sure that we're heating the pool as we need, but also we're fine tuning all the set points around pool water temperature, pool air temperature, ventilation flow rates to really maintain the service that we want to deliver at the lowest energy cost and energy consumption, more or less, right? So fine tuning a lot of the set points, fine tuning the approaches, using higher RH levels because we have a better enclosure that can withstand it. With higher RH's relative humidity, so with higher RH, you have less dehumidification, which is more or less your culprit number one in terms of energy consumption and dollar sign in your pool. You're fine tuning all your full equipment, so pump specification and sorry, I'm blanking on the word, but the water recirculation and all the filtration approach. So there's a lot of tweaks you can do to maintain the service that you want to do while optimizing, you know, your energy consumption and minimizing to the bare minimum. So again, the same, like, you know, I've done a lot of presentations around commercial kitchens. We're going to start to do the same with swimming pools because it's the same approach where you have a lot of different key levers, and some of them are really big, some are more like little crumbs that you can tackle afterwards. But by knowing where the key levers are, we do not yet have a swimming pool narrative, and yet we've already got a 4-page technical report on how we're going to approach the design of the swimming pool. So it's the same thing, understanding the key levers early and making sure that we can embed them into the design without changing the service.
All right. We look forward to those presentations.
We'll do a
Once
whole
it's-
presentation
John.
just on the pool.
Yeah, on the pool, exactly.
Once
On
it's
the pool.
clarified.
The John, I wanted to switch gears one moment on the enclosure. So we're looking at an effective R30 enclosure. I'm sorry, these are very boring architectural questions, but it's a passive house presentation. So the you know, effective R30, and you, as you were mentioning, you need to take into account the derating based on the thermal bridges and whatnot. Do we have a sense of proportionality in terms of how much the thermal bridges are derate the enclosure on a building like this? And so how much more insulation are you talking about?
I think,
We don't have a model yet, Ken.
yeah,
Okay.
we haven't, but we're paying mindful attention to wherever there's a thermal break to just minimize it in terms of our cladding systems and so forth. No matter what the loss is, the fewer there are, the better.
Right.
We're as those drawings illustrated, we're using both an insulation in the cavity and an outboard 4-inch insulation outboard approach, and so we're optimistic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It looks like you've got, it's a matter of degree, and I'm sure it's very achievable.
And Ken, just to add to that, I think what we're going to see is going to be fairly similar to other passive houses in the sense that mitigation is almost complete on most elements, except for the structural thermal bridging between the parkade and the level 1. Right? We are set with a concrete structure for code requirements. We can break some of that structure, but not everything. So I think that's going to be your vast majority, and we're already paying attention to it. So
do we see, from your experience, Maureen, of working on several buildings or more at this point, where you've got an apartment building or conditioned space over a parking garage, like the approach to that, is it getting more universal, or is it always, as buildings tend to be? I looked at those 30 different wall sections and I was like, oh my gosh, can they simplify it? But at the end of the day, it's complicated, so it's hard to. What's happening with the parking?
I think the parking is a little bit more straightforward in the sense that you're mainly talking about structural thermal bridging.
Right.
And either you can take a firmly broken approach or you cannot. And in that case, you're using kind of like return insulation and, you know, skirt insulation around the elevator pits where you cannot break that. So the only thing I would say is that your two different approaches are fairly well known. But shout out to Maxell on being the structural engineer on this one, where by designing together really early, they have broken up the structure at the key places where we need insulation much more than what we've seen on other projects. So we have, for example, you know, think parking level, most of it is outside, but you have your elevator, you have your lobby, you have your stairs, which are internal. We have, in certain instances, being able to split the slab between the cold slab in the parking, which receives the cars, and the warm slab inside the elevator, the stairs, and others. So
there were a couple of beautiful details there.
I know, right?
Continuous.
So excited about it.
Great job, John.
So yeah.
So a couple of things to before we finish up here, because we are going long, but we don't want to go too long. Respect everybody's time. There was a question on the blower door test and the occupancy of the building, the TCO versus CO. And this almost is like, it sounds to me almost like a code question in terms of being able to occupy the building and when you pass the final blower door test. And I'm just wondering, you may or may not know in this specific instance, but your experience around that kind of sequencing.
Yeah, correct. So because the energy codes, they're getting tighter, but they also want proof of the building we've delivered, right? Like that's why we're starting to see greenhouse gas emission penalties with Bordeaux and other municipalities looking at that model. Therefore, yes, they cannot wait for Passive House certification at completion to give you the certificate of occupancy, because that would not work based on timing. However, what we've heard up to now from DOER is that they are requiring the proof of what you've delivered, meaning that they want to see your final airtightness testing report. They want to see your ventilation commissioning report. So you do have to work ahead of time to know that that will be the deliverables you will be judged on to get to your certificate of occupancy. So not quite a passive house certification question, but think this is the way I've described it to my clients, is that the package that you need to have to send to your certifier to demonstrate that you've delivered is probably the similar package that code officials will want to see to demonstrate that you have met your, you have delivered what you said you would. And then you can wait on your certifier depending on timing as to when you receive full certification and your plaque. But
get the blower door test done.
Correct. Like, I don't think there will be a way for you to say you intended on delivering X and not do so and still have your certificate of occupancy. I'm not aware of all the penalties, but this is what has been described to us. Yeah. With DOER up to now. Good.
And I guess to maybe wrap it up here, John, I think going back to the finance question, the cost, and the the ultimate affordability and cost framework. And I know there was an interesting, I think, finance relationship on the University of Southern Maine residence building there, and what you're looking at with the developer here. There was a question or a comment around basically connecting the energy efficiency and the savings to the financing. And I've seen at best kind of those sort of sporadic connections. I was excited to see a new example of it out west, perhaps. And what you're seeing with this project, or with conversations around that, or in general?
Yeah, it's still very early. We mostly see this kind of premium being willing to be paid by institutions who are going to own the asset for a very long time and realize the wisdom in it. Some socially enlightened developers as well. But in terms of making a strong financial case, what I'm most hopeful about, and what I'm hearing a lot about, in fact, just spoke about last week at a different panel, is that increasingly developers are becoming more sophisticated about all of these metrics, because they're getting pressure from their investors through their ESG requirements. And so I really do feel like we're attacking this from both sides. We're attacking it from a design side with better design, better performance, higher coefficient of performance, or lower, whichever the case may be. And also from an investment side, from end users who are looking to rent an apartment to big finance entities that are buying whole portfolios of real estate assets. They are looking for these kind of enduring buildings. They are looking for socially conscious buildings and climate forward buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And so the developers are following that lead. And I'm very optimistic that it's going to be an increasingly important factor, not only for design, but for investment.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's great to see if fits and starts here, things moving. So, and this project is a big part of that. So I want to leave it there for the moment. And thank you both very much for your time today. Thank everyone for joining us, for your questions. And I hope we can see you at an upcoming event or training in the near future. It's all about this continuous learning as we're discovering and moving forward.